I'd like to first welcome you all to this IRU webinar on the Job Ready Graduates Package and its impact on participation and equity. Wish to make an acknowledgement that I'm currently on the lands of the people of the Kulin Nations, and I wish to pay my respects. Some background for the JRG, as Job Ready Graduates is known, and the Innovative Research Universities who bring this webinar. Universities and academics rarely agree on many things, but one thing that does unite the 8 members of the Innovative Research Universities is a commitment to higher education participation, growth and participation, particularly those from equity and disadvantaged backgrounds. And whenever there's a fiscal constraint or fiscal or financial challenges on supply of places, there is a risk that those from disadvantaged backgrounds are most likely to miss out on an opportunity to participate or progress with their higher education studies. So that's one of the reasons why we've organised this webinar. There have been many changes that have happened due to the Job Ready Graduates Package, particularly in terms of the funding for universities from governments and students. And there have also been those funding mechanisms have received a fair bit of attention from us, and you can check those out on our website. What's received a little bit less attention are some of the changes that have affected how universities can support student success and progress, and the restrictions now placed on students, the Commonwealth support for students and the requirements for their progress. It's too soon, even for the data nerds like myself, to see some of the impacts of the changes in funding on how they'll have affected student choice. But 2022 has seen students return to campus after a couple of years of quite severe interruption, particularly for the high school students. And we're already starting to see how universities have reacted to and are trying to accommodate students returning to campus and ensure their success and compliance with some of the further requirements under JRG for student success. So we have 3 presenters today, of which all of them have a very broad understanding of the Innovative Research University members and the topic of higher education equity. The first speaker will be Professor Andrew Harvey, who is currently Director of Pathways in Place program at Griffith University and was previously a professor at La Trobe University, also a member of the Innovative Research Universities. We will then have Jessica Vanderlely, Professor from La Trobe University, who's the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Students. And she has, again, a broad understanding of the IRU members, having previously been the Vice-Chancellor's Fellow and worked with our members on student success. And finally, we have Professor Maree Dinan-Thompson, Deputy Vice-Chancellor Education at James Cook University, who is the chair of our Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academics Committee. So again, she has a very broad range of experience and understanding of what goes on at our member institutions. I know that with such great presenters, it's best that they get as much time as possible to present and for you to listen to their insights. So I'll quickly hand over to the first presenter, Professor Andrew Harvey, and I'll be back for the Q&A.
Thanks, Peter. And so I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm on. And there is going to be an Indigenous flavour to some of this discussion. I'm aware also that apparently the content of what I say is less important than sticking to 15 minutes. So I will try to be as tight as possible, but if the orchestra starts up, we'll see how we go. I'm going to just quickly talk about the key points of the JRG, which are largely covered in all the IRU materials that Peter's already mentioned. I'm going to talk about some of the new equity issues raised by JRG and then some of the existing problems that remain and time permitting solutions. We'll just see how we go. In terms of legislation itself, you are hopefully familiar with most of the main points. There's a reduction in revenue per student. The Commonwealth has reduced its proportion and the student fees have risen accordingly. There's a 4-fold difference now between fees in different clusters, which is dramatically up from what it was historically. It was originally a flat fee and then it went to about double. There's a long-term floor under the Commonwealth Grant Scheme. There's improved flexibility to move funds around between levels, including postgraduate and undergraduate, although not to enabling courses, which I'll talk about. And there's an expansion, a modest expansion of university places, but still quite limited. So just in terms of some of the new issues that have arisen, supply is obviously still limited, unlike it was under the demand-driven system, and that will affect equity group participation and access. We talk about the budget being constrained. It's worth noting, though, that very shortly the Commonwealth will spend 50% more on supposedly private schools than it will on higher education. So one of the questions we need to ask is whether the budget itself is too tight, or whether this is a question of priorities as well. And I think we obviously do have debt and deficit issues, but there's also a question of priorities. And if you look at the burgeoning growth of areas such as private school funding, you can see that there's a real priority setting there from the previous government. So that will have an ongoing impact on participation. The gap in fees, the fourfold difference between the fee types, is very hard to comprehend from any perspective of consistency or coherence or equity. It will lead to an average 15% increase for Indigenous students and 10% for women, as the IRU have pointed out. And it doesn't seem to be based on employability. It does not seem to be based on graduate earnings. It does not seem to be based on the cost of courses. So this is really the government making decisions about priority areas, although in doing that, really providing a disincentive for universities to offer those courses because the revenue to universities overall is lower in areas like STEM than it is in humanities now. So strange, and I think needs to be fixed. Others have written more extensively on that. Enabling programs, I did want to mention, I think this is important. The money for enabling programs will decline per student because the declining Commonwealth revenue can't be offset by student fees, because the student fees are zero in most of the tuition-free programs. And universities are not able to direct places into enabling as well. Places can only go from enabling up into undergraduate and postgraduate. This is quite important. Enabling programs attract different cohorts than undergraduate courses, and indeed then TAFE diploma and VET diploma courses. We know that twice as many low SES students proportionally enrol in enabling programs than undergraduate, 4 times as many Indigenous students in enabling than undergraduate. So what you're seeing is a very different group of students. And when we talk about that flat lining of low SES students over time in higher education, it did rise briefly under the demand-driven system, but it is still pretty flat now. You start to see how something like an enabling program can make a difference to the equity story. While the variation in HECS fees and help fees doesn't seem to drive course behaviour, student choice, what does change their decision is the existence of a help debt or not in the first place. And so we're seeing all sorts of students enrolling in enabling programs, transitioning into higher education that wouldn't otherwise. So I think it's quite important, and I think it's been marginalised again under this program, and there's a real need for extra work there. The 50% rule, which I assume Jess and Maree will talk about a bit, is quite important. Brett Stevenson at La Trobe has done a lot of work in this space, particularly around non-participating enrolments. And these are ghost students. Ghost students is a bit deceptive though, because it assumes that students are completely invisible. Most non-participating enrolments, in other words, most 0 marks in subjects, are students who do get marks in other subjects. So the majority behaviour is not students who are completely non-participating, but it's subject by subject. Having said that, students who exhibit non-participating behaviour have only a 10% chance of an average pass rate at the end of the year, while students with earned fails, more than 2/3 of them are likely to end up with an average pass rate. This is, again, according to Brett's research. A very big issue around students who simply are not there and who are receiving 0 marks. And this is particularly an issue for Indigenous students. We don't know enough about who these students are or why they're receiving zeros. There was a theory that some of them are there because they're trying to attract transfer payments. There's been theories that they're there because they don't know when the census date is. But there's clearly more going on than that. And so we need, amongst other things, much earlier identification of non-participating students. So we need early assessments, much better analytics. And then we need shoving, I guess, rather than nudging. So we need much stronger academic progression and monitoring rules. Just continuing finally on the 50% rule, there is a bit of a risk that with that rule and the performance-based funding, universities could in future start assessing recruitment on the basis of risk and students who might be at risk of not completing, and that could have all sorts of negative and stereotypical equity implications. And we've seen that in the US where performance-based funding has been introduced, that Latinx and Black students are often less likely to be recruited. So that there's a risk, I'm not saying it's happening now, but there is a risk in some of the policies that are being developed that universities will start to make decisions, potentially even based on geodemographic factors around who or who not to enrol. And I think that's something to be concerned about potentially in future. In terms of ongoing equity issues, the big one to me is schools, and this is ATAR and streaming in particular. So the recent UAC data suggests that New South Wales students are actually flocking to humanities and social sciences despite the increase in fees. So 9% increase between 2020 and 2022 for society and culture. So that shows, as much as we've got any data, that perhaps the course variations are not going to affect student choice that much, although of course they affect repayments, debt levels, and potentially career choices later on. So they're still significant. But what is happening at the same time is that enrolments in Queensland in Year 12 Arts and Social Sciences have declined dramatically, particularly between 2017 and 2019 when ATAR was brought in, because students are worried about the scaling of subjects. So students are moving away from arts and humanities because they fear those subjects will be scaled down. And this is a common problem across the country. So we have a hierarchy of curriculum. We have a hierarchy of certificates. So the International Baccalaureate, we have the Victorian Certificate of Applied Learning. We have a lot of informal streaming into non-ATAR pathways. And all of this tracking, streaming, division is really impacting life choices. So for example, in Victoria, 42% of Indigenous students in Year 12 do the Certificate of Applied Learning instead of the VCE. Of the students who finish VCAL, less than 1% go into higher education. So you can see the way that higher education doors are being closed very early for certain groups because there's tracking streaming. That's an ongoing issue and a big one, I think. I haven't heard the orchestra, so just quickly in terms of suggestions, JRG funding, cluster models, I think just needs to be fixed. I think we've got that wrong, and I think that's largely acknowledged. There is money in terms of the overall budget because we have prioritised an increase in private school funding at the expense of higher education, pure and simple. So there could be room for an expansion of places if somebody was willing to take on that question of priorities again. I think we need a review of the school streaming and tracking beyond a review of the funding-based model and an ATAR overhaul. And I think there are other issues around the equity framework, which I haven't got time to talk about, but I've emphasised some of them. The framework is still very undergraduate focused, domestic student focused, public university focused, and problematic and limited in a number of ways. So that's just a brief overview of some of the issues as I see them. And I look forward to hearing further information about what universities are doing to try to address the JRG issues. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Andrew. That was well within the time frame, so hopefully we'll have time to come back to some of those details at the end. I'll hand over to Jessica Vanderlei now to talk about what La Trobe's been doing.
Thanks so much, Peter. Just bear with me while I share my screen. Is that all working? Perfect. So that was a fantastic introduction. Thank you so much, Andrew, for perfectly setting the scene, I guess, for my presentation. But before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that I am joining today from beautiful Bratulong country in South Gippsland here in Victoria, and pay my respects to Indigenous elders past, present and emerging. So the focus of my case study today is really going to be exploring some of the data that we've been able to uncover in terms of the impact of the accountability measures, so particularly the non-participating enrolment or genuine student category, and also our low completion rate students. So I will say a great big thank you to a number of my colleagues who are on the call. They were the ones who were instrumental in pulling this data set together, and their work over a number of years has really helped La Trobe to be able to think through the ways in which we'll be able to respond, and have already been responding for quite some time. So we'll start with the non-participating enrolments, and we were very fortunate here at La Trobe that ghost students or research around non-participating enrolments was led so well by Andrew Harvey and Brett Stevenson. So is it me? I'm getting some feedback. Oh, I'll keep going. Maybe? No? Good. Okay. So what that has meant for us is we were able to really hit the ground running, and we're already preparing a series of intervention approaches to target non-participating enrolments early on. So we have a target cohort of students where we can identify them based on a series of engagement measures. So has the student come to orientation? Have they logged into the LMS? Are they checking their emails? Do they have a timetable? So there's a whole range of them that we feed into our model, and that allows us to identify cohort that we think are potentially non-participating enrolments. So this is a proactive approach rather than waiting till the end of the semester where we see who the real non-participating enrolments might be. So there is a two-phased approach there. So our intervention is proactive, it's advisor-led and happens in the early weeks of the semester. Multiple emails, SMS and phone calls connect with every student that's identified as a potential non-participating enrolment. And we give those students an opportunity to either let us know over the phone or to fill out a short survey that covers their intentions for study. If they tell us that they want to drop out or they don't want to remain enrolled at La Trobe, we unenroll them. And if they say they need some more help, then we set up more intensive advising sessions that talk through, have you got your degree program right? Is there more support that you need? Is this a confidence issue, or is there some other barrier that's stopping you from engaging so far in their studies? So this year for our commencing cohort, we identified potentially 248 students, so about 1.6% of the cohort that could have been non-participating. We found out 71.3% of them were definitely going to be full non-participating enrolments because they said to us that they had no intention of studying with us. Some of them were actually enrolled at another institution, and others hadn't cancelled their enrolment despite the fact that they had made a decision that they didn't want to continue their study for well-being, family and work reasons. So really interesting insights that we were able to gather. 19.8% of them were participating, they just weren't using our system. So that was really interesting in itself and enables us to come back and encourage them to make sure that they're accessing their emails and answering and engaging with those systems. Our academic staff played a role. So once we had the list of students, our academics also helped us say, no, I've seen that student in class. I know who that person is, and they are definitely engaged. They just hadn't overcome the hurdle of the technology. And about 9% of the students needed more assistance. So those who we'd reach out and we'd speak to them about extra, they'd say they wanted to keep studying with us or they weren't quite sure how. So that's the sort of rough breakdown of the cohort for non-participating enrolments. Moving obviously that around 70% of those non-participating enrolments out of the system has a load impact for us early on, but really important flip side to that is the uplift in retention that no doubt we'll see as we exit students that really had no intention of studying with us. When students get to the end of the semester and they failed, if they continue to be non-participating in one or more of their subjects, that then loops into our low completion rate response. So I'll jump across into that. So what do we know about our low completers? So our team has done an analysis of about the last 5 years worth of data, and about 4% of our entire student cohort will at some point during their studies hit the low completion threshold. And about 25% of that low completion cohort are also non-participating enrolments. So there's a lot of overlap there, and by solving the NPE problem, we'll also reduce our LCRs in there. And Andrew mentioned the connection there between ghost students, and if they ghost one subject, then they're also likely to have failures later on. The bulk of our low completion rate students sit within first year, and that wasn't entirely surprising considering that NPEs will be pushed towards the first year as well. But you do see that continuation of second and third year students, or later years students, also hitting those targets. And one of the big things that we are thinking about in terms of our intervention approach is not only how do we support students to be more successful, but how do we help them to plan and spread their load in a way that enables them to bite off what they can successfully chew, but also delays the point in time at which they would hit the low completion threshold and gives them the best possible opportunity for success throughout their studies. We had about 60% in our commencing students were NPEs, and 11.5% of our low completers were those students who we never saw again in second year. So that's the connection there between what you would see as an attrition loss from one year to the next in our retention figures and LCRs. So I expected actually that percentage would be a lot higher, but it does help us to understand to some extent one of the reasons why students are leaving us as an institution. ATAR is obviously an important factor in understanding low completion rates. No surprise that the lower the ATAR level, the greater the risk or the incidence of low completion rate in those cohorts. And on the other side, the proportion of total low completers. It is interesting when you look and see this data, and it's not exactly what I had expected, just the proportion of the total LCRs that are actually sitting in there for high achieving students. So this isn't only a low achieving, a low ATAR problem. We do have issues in our higher achieving cohorts as well in terms of their success. Sub-bachelor and enabling were about 4 times plus as likely to hit the low completion threshold. Our enabling students were higher than that again, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the equity overlays there. Oh, I skipped it. So what did we find in terms of our equity students? So students from all equity backgrounds were more likely to be low completers than our general university cohort. So 4.1% of our overall cohort would be a low completer at one point in time. 6.5% of our low SES, cohort that's the proportion of that cohort that were low completers. The proportion of the total LCR, that the percentages, look funny here because students will fit within obviously more than one of these equity groupings at a time. So for us, our regional and remote students are commonly from low socioeconomic backgrounds, may also be first in family. So that's why the numbers don't add up there. But what was really striking to me in looking at this data is the impact of regional and remote and low SES on the proportion of LCRs. So much more likely to be LCRs, disproportionately so compared to their representation as part of the overall university population. So that calls into question for us really the strategies that we use to intervene with students across the board, but particularly for those students from low socioeconomic, regional and remote, and of course the work that we do already with students from Indigenous backgrounds and those with living with disabilities. Get it to work in a sec. There we go. So our advising approach isn't that different from those that are happening across the university sector. So I won't dwell on it too much. It basically fits into 3 phases. We have ramped up the communications in the front end of what we call nurture communications. So these are those that will go out between offer and enrolment to really help students understand what they need to have in their toolkit to enable them to be successful when they come to study with us. We reach out to our students proactively, to our commencing students, to welcome them to the university, but also to make sure that they're connected with support services. And one of the tweaks that we've made in that space is to be really intentional about the advice that we give around subject load. So encouraging students to take 3 subjects rather than 4 if they're thinking that they're not as confident, and also helping them to understand how their degree program spaces out so that a little bit of time at the front end, you can pick subjects up over our terms or our summer semester and still make sure that they're not significantly impacting the time to complete their degree. The phase 2 interventions, that's really where the rubber hits the road for us. It's often or always predictive analytics informed, but often it's geared in the early phases to those students who are deemed to be at risk for a number of factors, including their equity status. As we get more data about the student, our models can become more sophisticated. And we can connect with students who are failing subjects. We can layer in our engagement metrics to make sure that we're targeting students that we really know need our interventions. And we know that students are around 20% more likely to be successful if they've connected with an advisor during their time with us. Our NPE intervention approach is a new layer to that phase 2 proactive outreach. And that is also weaved into the work that we're doing around academic progression. So the early phases of our academic progressions work are about helping students to connect with support services, build a success plan. They attend back on track workshops. And then our phase 3 interventions are really the intensive advice, developmental planning, and potentially enrolment sanctions where we need to put those in place. We are currently reviewing our academic progressions policy at La Trobe, specifically to move the more intensive interventions earlier into the time point so that students aren't as far through in terms of the number of fails that they've accumulated before we're sitting down and thinking about what could a subject level sanction look like. And our approach at this stage is that even if a student fails 1 subject a semester, they will be having that conversation straight away, and we will be talking to them proactively about their subject load for the following semester. There's lots of challenges. Diploma and enabling has been one of the biggest ones that we've been dealing with so far. And part of the big challenge there is that a number of our diploma students are actually hitting the low completion threshold at the end of their first semester. So we don't end up in that cycle where you have enough time to really say, okay, you've had a semester, you've seen how you've gone. Suddenly we're saying, oh, you've hit the low completion threshold, you're losing access to your support. So one of the things that we've put in place is effectively a fee waiver or a scholarship That means that if a student is hitting that, we are proactively advising them about their plan in terms of the next semester, but we're not flipping them to full fee paying. They'll lose their access to the Commonwealth support, but the university will pick that up and bear that cost until the student gets back on track. And we feel that that's really important because of the high numbers of second chance learners and students from equity backgrounds that are entering into our enabling and diploma pathways really as a step in to higher ed. And for us, particularly in our regional areas, that's critically important to supporting participation. We've got some challenges around academics understanding what the JRG is, what the measures are that we need to put in place, and the importance in that perpetual conversation, the importance of early assessment and transition pedagogy, and making sure that the curriculum does a lot of the heavy lifting for us in terms of supporting students to be successful. So that's another piece of focused work that will continue. And the more early assessment we have, the more robust our analytics models become, and we can become much more targeted in our interventions earlier in the semester. We've had some work, we've been doing some work with career practitioners in our partner schools to help them understand the requirements around the JRG, and particularly getting their support to have conversations with students that enable them to understand what it's like to start at university and the realities of you can't just come and have fun for the first semester and see how you go and fail everything because that's okay, because that's what I did when I started, but actually helping them to understand that if a student isn't ready to go when they come to us in the first semester, if they haven't made an informed decision about the degree in which they're going to study, they will struggle and they could hit this threshold and then are less likely to be able to progress in their studies. We're also helping students to understand that requirement so it doesn't come as a shock or out of the blue that an advisor is calling them. Our students are open and receptive to advisors, but we're doing everything we can to help them understand it and to understand that when we have a conversation about them hitting a low completion threshold, that actually this is a government requirement. The university will do everything we can to stop them getting to that point, but the university isn't deciding to switch them to full fee paying. This is a legislative requirement that we need to put in place, and we need to work in partnership with students to make sure that they're as successful as possible to begin with. Our schools pathways programs and our enabling programs are critical because they help students to get that understanding of what it's really like to study at the university. And they're the sorts of pathways that we want to make sure students from VCAL backgrounds, students, mature age students who are thinking about coming back to study, and students who potentially flip to our unscored VCE can make sure that they've got supportive pathways that give them a leg up when they come to study. And Andrew and his team were instrumental in developing those pathways while he was at La Trobe. So I'm probably well over my 10, 15 minutes. I'm not sure how the time went, but that's just a brief snapshot of where we're at, and very happy to answer questions. Thanks, Peter.
Oh, thank you, Jess. That was a fantastic presentation. I'll quickly hand over to Maree. We do have plenty of time, but you can go ahead, Maree, and present us your experience at JCU.
Thanks, Peter. Just getting the slides up, and I think I will have to change presenter mode for you. Is that better? Thank you. And I'll talk a bit louder. My sound's been playing up. So I'm coming to you today from the Noormabada campus, and I'd really like to pay my respects to our Indigenous peoples and contributions, in particular Irukandji, Gumma Yidinji and Jabberkai people who have made very strong contributions here at JCU. I suppose I wanted to go back to the lovely rules and look at what the impact is of JRG around student facing and university facing. And what Jess has shared with us is a combination of those two But going back to the rules has really helped in trying to position what our strategies are and looking at data and how we progress. So you'll see academic suitable. Suitable is the tagline that they use, but also genuine students. And for me at JCU, our genuine students really needs to be about our genuineness as an institution in the engagement with students, rather than this positioning from the government on genuine students. If you look at JCU, we have quite the demographic in terms of our regionality, of course, up to near 80%. But our first in family is really consistent and quite high across the institution. In addition to that, our Indigenous enrolment sits around about 6% on average. And then our low SES, usually between the 25 and 30%. So when listening to Andrew and Jess before, all of those factors come into place usually as impacts for success rates at our institutions. So you'll note down the bottom that our demographic also encourages only about a 64% full-time load. So we here have low completion rates anyway. And now in addition to that, with our advising that we're doing, and we strongly have an advising model too, Jess, you can see that there could be further implications for our completion. This is our JCU student success strategy. It's in pilot, and what you can see is where there's increased student risk level, then we have more personalised staff resource allocation, and trying to use our technologies and data to assist us in that capacity too. So again, at the front end, that proactive strategy for our non-participating students, largely that communication, sorry, that's at the amber, but at the green zone, much awareness focus, mass engagement, automated messages to all students, and trying to get them to engage with that self-determination. We then move to risk mitigation, which obviously has to be advising focused, but it's on recommended engagement. So we too look in the LMS, we check to see attendance, we do all of those types of live data monitors. In addition to that though, we've worked with our performing planning analytics unit on a multifactorial analysis of our student demographic that looks at those crossover factors you mentioned at the end, Jess, to try and highlight which students are going to be potentially risk on a low ATAR and adjusted ATAR, on a first in family, on an Indigenous rank, whatever the category it is, and look at that multifactorial nature. So you'll see though that we quickly progress into individualised case management at that risk mitigation. And then the level 3 is our progression focused. So the compulsory engagement, again, it's focused on individualised case management, but this one's more prescriptive, whereas the middle section is more about an inquiry type of approach, an appreciative inquiry advising model that we've put into there. So a little bit more detail here, and I probably haven't got time to progress through it, Peter, but it would be better for people to have a look at. And you can see the green zone is conversions and enrolments, and I think you called it nurture type communication, Jess, where you're reaching out, trying to seek out, are they prepared? What do we need to connect you with? Will you accept your offer, and what could we do further for you? In the amber zone, we go through that proactive data-driven early identification. You'll note there, though, we've got the student risk index score reports, which is what I mentioned to you at a subject level. We have deployed the advocate module within the simplicity system to undertake our case management. Mentioned it's an appreciative inquiry case because we understand through our own demographic that we have cumulative risk factors and complex needs. Our students have to work here at JCU. We know that that is a major reason as to why they leave the institution. So the needs here are quite complex, and we have to assure that we're catering for those. We do ask at the next stage to complete a student success plan. So it initiates from student agency first, and then bring it in from that advising aspect. We're utilising the 9Q model to assist us in Coates' work there, just in time engagement, but also trying to bring in, well, what other reaches might we need to connect our students with, not only for learning, but also in the belonging or the aspects across the institution. And you can see the red zone is focusing on progressions and being quite prescriptive in that nature. We reviewed our progressions policy last year in light of this coming, and wanted to see as to what that might have impact for us. This is just an example of how we've deployed the advocate system, so the case management system at the institution specific for the risk index, moving it through to where we will have the arranging an appointment because you've been flagged that we need to do this, then go into your own student success plan and following that through further into the risk management, or potentially dropping off there too and picked up at another time. But what I wanted to do was to provide you a bit of a case study on our Diploma of Higher Education. Now, it sits in the sub-degree space because JCU was not fortunate in having a number of enabling places. We only have 100 of those and we have 400 of sub-degree. So hence our Diploma of Higher Ed sits in the sub-degree space. And I'll leave you scan the detail there, but down the bottom, you'll see that majority of our students are regional remote, first in family, low SES, Indigenous, and identify as having a disability. So all of our equity factors are together here, and our students do deserve the attention to assure that their success in the diploma and conversion into bachelor's works really well. So historically, this has actually been an open access course for us, but knowing that the JRG was coming, we had to instigate an ATAR place on that, a 50 ATAR, and we've now introduced a JCU prep subject, capacity building, to permit that 4 weeks before jumping into the diploma. Importantly though, there has been huge success in this particular model previously, where our DHG students attain a 75% to 90% pass rates in their bachelors because they have built capacity in this DHE. And this is quite a scary space for us at the moment between the enabling and the diploma, and Jess raised that as well. If you look at the blue box down the bottom, a review of our 2021 teaching period 1 DHE students last year, we noted out of the 552 that were in there, 72 students would have lost their CSP. So therefore we needed to instigate some further work for us. This here displays the types of reach to which is undertaken through the case management in our Diploma of Higher Education. And you can see how resource intensive it is. It cuts across all of our areas, from our student services to our Diploma of Higher Ed staff, our learning, teaching, student engagement staff. But you can see there's multiple integrations here and the way we reach out to students. I really wanted to focus though on our data for this year, and because we're only just reaching the end and results publication for us is next Tuesday. So we're only just hitting the cusp of that. But prior to the semester of this year, DHE students have been part of our communication strategy around the JRG requirement in our case management right from the beginning. And you would have noted on this slide that pre-enrolment, we actually undertake a pre-semester quiz, which looks at that green proactive assessment, referral to services, study planning, all of the above. In addition to that, they were informed about JRG. So the upfront knowledge around saying that 4 subjects is a full-time load, 3 subjects could be more manageable, in keeping their Centrelink payments and study assist payments to go through, we need to engage with you early and have that study advising conversations with you previous to census to assure that, you know, this might be the best trajectory for you. And so what I'm showing to you straight underneath there is in our subject load, of course, we have seen a significance between the 21 and 22 year of the increase in the 3 subject load and the decline in the full-time load. Therefore, it's going to push out our completions all the more. And as you can imagine, some other people at our institution are quite concerned about the study load planning capacity that could be undertaken in forecasting what our study load is going to be. So we are seeing an impact in this very small case study that I've presented to you to let you know that this advising is quite prominent for our students. We're doing it from the best for the student. We don't wish for them to lose their CSP, and therefore we need to assure that the advising model is going to take into account their needs. And knowing our demographic, this is something we must do at JCU. So the questions that we've asked here is, you know, at this point in time is what are the implications of the different pathway options in regards to the JRG, but also in our duty of care to students. So we're currently underway with another review of our pathway programs at the institution and looking at our enabling and our sub-degree places and thinking about an architecture there. As mentioned, we've also had to look at our policy and procedures and in particular progression, but we also have to think about that cutting across to decision makers who go out to the coalface, you know, and helping us to work through that. A question too at the institution at the broader level is what is a fit for purpose student data architecture overall? And how do we integrate, how do we pull all that together to make it easier for our students and also for our staff to work with live data and to look at what would be the genuineness of their relationship with students to engage and inform all the way through. Final one is about awareness. And my question here really is not only for students, but as you did too, Jess, it's with careers counsellors, schools, parents, guardians, all of the above. So communication strategies with our individual students right now about them being in the possible risk zone. But a new area for us too is our post-grad coursework CSP students, because previously they haven't been under a significant watch, whereas a lot of our focus has been on first year. And the first year has been to do with retention and things. Our secondary schools, including career counsellors and our parents and our community, because what's lost in here too, I think, and you raised it too, Andrew, is that a lot of our focus here has not been on the non-school leaver and on our community people who are looking at that reskill and looking at that upskill capacity. And so we're, losing ground there all the more, we think. So I'll leave it there, Peter. Probably spoke too fast, but the slides will be available for people and we can turn back to you.
Thanks very much, Maree. That was a very interesting presentation and really complemented Jess's and Andrew's to begin with.